Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Chairman and CEO of Stagwell Inc., also Chairman of Harris Poll, Mark Penn. Mark, thanks so much for joining me once again.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. There is a wide-ranging Harvard Caps Harris poll from May that I want to dive into. It has all things to do with 2024. Let's start with President Biden's approval rating, which remains unchanged at 44%. What does that mean that it didn't move month to month?
Well, in our poll, it shows that President Biden's ratings are more or less static. And below 45 is hard for a president to get reelected. Below 40, I would say it's impossible. Below 45, it's certainly possible, but hard. And the president's been out there trying to improve it, talking about the economy, saying he's doing a better job, and it's not moving. And importantly, when people look back and I ask the job approval rating of President Trump, Trump gets a 55% job approval rating. So that 11-point gap is a critical part of what's motivating voters in these polls. And Biden has either got to bring his up or bring Trump's down.
Why do you think Trump's is so high at 55%? Is it because voters really think that he's done such a better job compared to Biden? Is it Trump nostalgia? Perhaps looking at the past with rose-colored glasses? What's that about?
Well, you have to say nostalgia in the sense that people are evaluating things in the past. So when people look back in the past, like their childhood, maybe they were great, maybe not as good, but are they as objective as at the time? Because at the time, President Trump never got a 55% job approval. So he is getting, in retrospect, and perhaps in comparison, a 55% job approval, higher than he got when he was actually doing the job. But nevertheless, that's the fact. That's how the voters see it.
If he's getting a higher job approval rating now than when he was president, who is warming up to him? What do those demographics look like?
Well, I think across the board, you're seeing the demographics warm up to Trump. You know, surprisingly, in Black and Hispanic communities as well, because I think it's really the flip side of if you think the economy is not going well, then you tend to blame Biden and tend to think Trump did a better job with the economy. And there are a lot of voters out there, even though President Biden has a case that the economy has improved, there's no recession, growth is happening, jobs are good, people are focusing on inflation, and prices are up about 20% from when President Biden took office.
I want to break down the economy by the numbers because the economy, as you said, and inflation remain top issues facing voters. Earlier this month, the NASDAQ closed at an all-time high. The S&P 500 hit a record high. An April CPI report showed inflation is cooling down. Do you think voters will attribute these types of numbers, think more favorably about Biden when it comes to the economy, or is that not the case just yet?
Well, this is what has head scratching over at the Biden campaign. They're saying the economy is getting better, inflation is coming down, jobs are good, unemployment is low. If I ask people how are you doing in their personal life, a lot of people say pretty good. And they're wondering, why can't we communicate this? Well, I think there are one or two explanations of that. One is inflation, unlike unemployment, affects everybody. So unemployment, if it goes from 3% or 4% to 6%, that affects directly 2%. When the price of eggs goes up 30 or 40%, that affects almost everybody who buys eggs. And so I do think you see this widespread inflation effect. And we haven't seen that in politics for a long time because we haven't seen inflation since perhaps Jimmy Carter. But it was devastating back then. And it is devastating now to a politician running for office. And nearly 50% of the people in our poll believe that their personal economic situation is getting worse. And again, that is primarily traceable to the higher expense of middle-class life.
So, Mark, based on that, do you think that this election is going to come down to the economy and the economy alone?
Well, the economy, as you know, is always a big issue. But there are a number of issues floating around here. The economy, immigration, crime, climate change, racial equity, abortion. I'm not going to attribute it yet to one single issue because we're not down to the final shoot of the campaign, which won't occur until Labor Day. If I had to call the campaign today, Trump is clearly ahead. People are upset about the economy. They think Trump did a better job. And that's the basis on which I call the election.
And if you would call the election today, Trump is ahead in that horse race. Aside from the economy, are there other factors as to why?
Well, right now, surprisingly, Trump's personal rating is ahead of Biden's by several points. I saw that too in other polls. I was looking pretty carefully. Do we have an anomaly here? Because Trump's personal ratings have always been a lot lower than President Biden's. But President Biden's personal ratings are lower. The economic situation, as you see it, and I also think what the president did on the Israel-Hamas situation. He's down to a 36% approval rating. Most voters disagree with his decision to withhold weapons from Israel. And the more he leans to the left on Israel, the more his ratings and his vote seems to be going down, not up.
I want to talk about third party candidates. How is a third party candidate like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. impacting the horse race here?
It's really hard to tell what the impact of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is going to be. It looks like he's mostly neutral, might take a hair more from Biden, but a lot of people don't know who Robert F. Kennedy is or what he stands for. There could be some pretty big changes here. He could flame out in the end and just get a couple of points. But if I had to call it today he's neutral to maybe a point minus, but he's not making the voter decision here. The preference in the vote is much larger than any difference he is making.
What is making the voter decision here? Is this election going to come out to turn out both Trump and Biden turning out their bases, or is it going to come out to either of those top candidates trying to convince independents to vote for them?
Well, we have 31% of the population, the voting population, who says, I might change my mind. It's not totally made up. So, no, I don't think this is going to come down to turnout. Turnout is going to be high. It's going to be high on both sides. It's going to come down to the swing voters, suburban moms, a lot of people, a lot of men, I think, have been moving over to Trump, women sticking with Biden. It's going to come down to that gender gap. I think it's going to come down to the basics in the electorate, not to turnout.
The poll also found that a majority of voters want a presidential debate. How much do you think this is going to move the needle? We're going to see one in June and one in September.
Well, over 70% were enthusiastic about seeing a debate, and I think at least the first debate, it's going to get a very big audience, particularly if it's broadcast, as a roadblock across many networks. I think this is a high-risk move on the Biden campaign. They've been looking at very static polling numbers. They've been looking at Trump doing better and better each month. And they said, well, maybe let's get them both on a stage at the same time. And Biden will surprise people because he will do a better job because expectations are super low. And Trump will disappoint because he can't possibly deliver on his promises. At least that's the theory. And so they've said, let's do a game changer. If Trump falters, I think it could alter the race 2 to 4 points. If Biden puts in a weak performance, he could have a very, very shaky convention coming up because a lot of people will be worried.
I know you think this is, or you said that this is high risk for the Biden campaign. Is it also high reward too? I mean, does it have the potential to be high reward?
Absolutely. A good debate by Biden here would blow away expectations, deal with the idea that he's too old, bring Trump down. And so I think you've got a lot of efforts here where the campaign, I think, made a decision to take the risk, hopefully get a reward, and run the risk figuring, hey, we're going to have our convention anyway. What difference is it going to make?
Does Trump similarly have as big of a payday, really, when it comes to this debate as Biden would?
I'm surprised Trump accepted so quickly. If I were in his campaign, I would have put a few more conditions on. I would have made sure I got a mix of moderators so it wasn't just from one of the networks. I would have ended that practice. I would have restructured the debate more. After all, he didn't need the debate. He's winning. Uh, Biden needed the debate, and Trump accepted so quickly that I think Biden got the Biden camp got the better of the Trump camp in the setup for the debate. And the setup for the debate is, well, it's not the whole debate, but it's a good part of it.
Trump currently faces legal challenges, as we know. If he does find himself convicted between now and Election Day, is that going to change voters' minds at all?
Well, being convicted of a felony, last time I looked, will never be good for a candidate for office. Is that going to happen? I think that we're going to get a very good inkling of that in the New York verdict. People have always considered the New York trial on hush money payments to be sort of irrelevant, not count all that much. Still, a conviction will be, something that gives voters pause. On the other hand, a hung jury or an acquittal will be a huge boost to the Trump campaign in the middle of summer or the beginning of summer here. And I think that if I had to bet, I think it's more likely you'll see a hung jury than anything else. But that's because no one can really agree on politics, and I doubt anybody could agree on this case.
Talk about how voters feel based on your poll about his legal challenges. Right now, we're in May, end of May, about 6 months away from Election Day.
Well, polling is not very good about predicting the outcomes of things that have never happened before. So we can ask questions and say, okay, if he's convicted of this, will you vote for him? When I worked with President Clinton, a lot of people said if President Clinton is impeached, he should resign. But it turned out we didn't resign and were eventually victorious. So while I love polls, on things that have never happened before, like presidential convictions, when the charges are disputed and seen through a political lens, what is that really going to do here? I'm going to say, obviously, it's not going. I don't think it'll help Trump unless he gets acquitted and or hung jury, in which case it might. How much will it hurt him? I think that's highly unpredictable at this point, and we're going to have to actually wait and see.
Let's now move to the Veep stakes here. Donald Trump floated some potential names last week to a reporter. He mentioned people like his HUD Secretary Ben Carson, Representatives J.D. Vance and Elise Stefanik, as well as Senator Marco Rubio. Other names that have been floated are North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, as well as Senator Tim Scott. Who do voters want to be his running mate, according to your poll?
Well, I think Donald Trump has been masterful in this so far. I mean, he is the apprentice king, so he knows how to build some mystery and excitement over who's going to be vice president. And I think he's doing a good job at that. I think our polling in general shows that if you did Tim Scott or Marco Rubio, those probably would be smart choices. Nikki Haley, of course, would be a great choice, but she's probably not in the running in either direction. There's maybe too much friction there for that to be a credible vice presidential choice. But I think a choice that he makes that really appeals more to voters in the center will help him. And I think if he picks someone too far to the right, that will probably hurt him. And I think he knows that.
Could the right vice presidential candidate maybe persuade an independent, perhaps even a Democrat or a never Trumper, to vote for Trump, maybe hold their nose and vote for him, knowing that their running mate is more mainstream?
We always look at these VP choices and how much time goes into them. And then, with a few exceptions, like I think Sarah Palin was probably a negative choice for McCain, most of the time they don't make a lot of difference at the end of the day, but they they signal something about the campaign. They're a message, right? When Bill Clinton chose Al Gore, it was a new generation to government. So who is he gonna choose and what message will it send? Clearly, I believe the more either candidate reaches out to voters in the middle, the more likely they are to succeed with their message.
Mark, anything in this Harvard Caps Harris poll that we didn't touch on that really stuck out to you that you want to dive into?
Well, one thing I'd say is that the student protests were received quite negatively by the voters. They were very much against them, 70, 80%, opposing the protests. I think they reflected quite negatively on academia and put a spotlight in a negative way on what could be going on at the universities, and I think it's going to increase the call for public reform of the universities, how they're approaching things, what they're teaching, and how they are treating, academic freedom within the right bounds. I think all of those things are going to get reexamined. I think the voters really reacted negatively to what happened on the campuses.
Do you think that hurts Democrats and impacts them more than Republicans? Because Republicans were pretty united in their messaging on the campus protests. Democrats were split. Some were bashing the protests. Others joined the encampments. So what do you think about that?
I don't know that it's going to play out as a big issue directly in the election. I think, remember, voters are really concerned about bread and butter issues here: economy, immigration, crime, middle class life, inflation, expenses. They may have a view on these other issues, but I don't think those are the central voting ones. The central voting ones are really what's happened here. A middle class person, when they go to fuel their car, buy their eggs, get a mortgage, have a house, all of those things, how's that changed, and how is the administration and the president affecting that? The voters are very focused on that, and I think they definitely have strong opinions. They're opposed to what happened in the universities. They don't think that the foreign policy is in the right direction, but that's not really what's deciding this election.
Mark, read the tea leaves for us as we sit here less than 6 months out from the election. What are you looking for?
I'm looking for something that's going to change the dynamic. Will the VP, in some sense, change the dynamic? Will the debate change the dynamic? Will things change in Israel-Hamas that might change the dynamic? I don't think, will inflation come down to some greater extent, or will it go back up? Will interest rates start to come down? What is going to change things? Everybody knows both of these candidates. 31% are saying, I've made up my mind tentatively, but I could change. And then you have to look at what are the game changers, and then we'll take another look, like summer goes by, and then the voters get together with their families, and usually what I call the post-Labor Day decision is where this thing comes out.
Well, Mark Penn, per usual, thank you so much for coming on and breaking it down for us. Are you looking forward to the next conversation?
Thank you. Glad to be here.